Hey, it's Mazzy. Welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about Lou Reed's final album, a meditative, ambient, drone-like record called Hudson River Wind Meditations on Light in the Attic. This is the second in a series of Lou Reed archive records that Light in the Attic is going to be rolling out over the next few years, I assume. First of all, about 2 years ago, year and a half ago, this came out. This was a unreleased tape, a demo tape, a self-copyright that he mailed himself of demos that he recorded at home. He mailed it to his parents' house, I believe in Long Island, and these were recordings of him and John Cale, songs that would turn up later on some early Velvet Underground records, and a fantastic archival series, and literally just that, almost like field recording demo things, and it really traces early roots of what he was doing with folk, kind of a folk sound, very minimalist sound. But today I want to talk about this, and I was thinking of how to present this, and I thought the way I want to present it was to showcase this in the beginning and show a little yin-yang thing of Lou Reed, how I see it, and I think some of the other people, even Light in the Attic and Laurie Anderson, Lou Reed's wife and an artist in her own right, are help curating this series for Light in the Attic. But I wanted to showcase several albums by other artists, and I'm using, dare I say, the Beatles as an example. I thought of a list of a lot of albums that were put together by pop rock artists that are nothing to do with that type of music. And I'm not talking about like genre shifting or changing genres. For instance, Elvis Costello coming out of the new wave scene, those early albums on Columbia, all of a sudden a couple years later does a country record, Nashville type record. I'm not talking about that, because artists will switch from soul to rock, jazz to rock, fusion things, doing different acoustic records. That's not what this is about. This is really doing something completely unrelated, and in a way something that challenges the fans. If someone's an all-in on an artist, challenging music or challenging ambient sounds on some of these records is just that, a challenge for some listeners. So I want to talk about this. This is a record. It wasn't really started as a record. He recorded this at home in their Soho loft, I believe, their place in New York City. And this was when Lou Reed was really doing a lot of Tai Chi, meditative things, body work, and he created this series of recordings for himself. They were eventually put out on CD only in 2007 on an independent label, and this is a 2-record set that Light in the Attic put out, and the bulk of this is repetitive drone sounds. There's almost like a heart repetitive warmthness to this. This is music for meditation. This is music for relaxation. This is a music for late night. This is work sound for mornings. It goes into side 2, this almost reminiscent of Tibetan bell things, with this almost bell-like quality and movement to it that is really kind of touches you. And if you kind of let yourself go in it, it is that Zen type of recording things. Again, not a song-based record, not for someone expecting, Walk on the Wild Side, none of that type of thing. Very experimental and not music-based in the normal sense. Again, ambient, experimental, industrial. On side 4, you get a little bit of the sound of the city, the ambiance of the city on here. So it's an unusual record in that sense. This comes in a gatefold. It's a double record. My copy is on blue vinyl, kind of a lovely, lovely blue vinyl. And this version comes with a book and storytelling, produced by Hal Wilner, who worked for years on Saturday Night Live as their musical producer and did a wonderful series of records. Lou Reed, in fact, is on, I think, 1 or 2 of them, where he did the music of Thelonious Monk, where he did Kurt Weill and Bertolt Brecht, where they did just a wonderful array, Nita Roto music for Fellini films and things over the years. And he produced this. There's some wonderful interview here with Hal Wilner, someone we also recently lost at the beginning of the pandemic, an amazing producer, and talking about how this came about and how Lou Reed recorded the things to play for himself during these sessions of Tai Chi and body movement. And just a really interesting take on it. Now, you can't talk about this record, I think, without talking about Metal Machine Music from 1975. And in a way, these are bookends. Now, this turned a lot of people off. Even the label originally, pulled it very soon after it was released. This is screeching feedback, loops, all kinds of experimental things that I think this is what is maybe his fifth album. And it really kind of turned off a lot of people, and even the record company. He wanted to release this in RCA Red Seal, which is the classical label wing of RCA Records, and it was never issued at that time. This is a record that's infamous. This is a record that people love to hate, and I understand why. Several years ago, I have a box set that came out, a Lou Reed CD box set that has his Arista and RCA records, and I decided I hadn't played this in literally probably 30 years. So I played it in the car while I was driving, and it worked for me in that moment. I can understand the brouhaha, the upsetting, people get angry when an artist that they love, that they follow, comes out with something like this unexpectedly, especially back in 1975. A couple of years, was it 4 years after Take a Walk on the Wild Side? He had done Berlin, which was even experimental to some people, which holds up today, a lot more than a lot of his other records. But this is an interesting experiment. I don't know if it has been reissued lately, but I think it's due for a reissue. Maybe Light in the Attic will do an archival series of this too. You never know. But I think this is an interesting experiment. Another one may be the album he did, Lulu, with Metallica. But that's music-based. So this is something very different. So this is the yin-yang of these two records, of Lou Reed's the meditative side and the abrasive side of Lou Reed. Not that you need this to get to this, but in a way you go from, 1975, almost 50 years later, we're getting a version of this. But again, this is for someone who wants to kind of namaste, breathe, relax, work themselves. This is not someone listening to a song by Lou Reed or even the Velvet Underground. But I just love that these records like this are being curated. I'll come back to these at the very end again. I do want to talk about some other artists here, and I'm keeping it within the Beatle format. It just seems like the easiest for me. I know there are other artists like this, and these are recordings that really challenge listeners, in many cases turned off listeners after doing pop records. And let's start with 1968's Two Virgins by John and Yoko. This was so controversial at the time, not only because of the record cover, that even Apple and Capitol EMI would not release this, and Tetragrammaton eventually released this record. And this is an ambient record. This is from 1968. I believe this came out about 3 weeks before the White Album came out. And obviously, if you all you know Revolution Number 9 on the White Album, that industrial avant-garde montage on side 4 that just leads into Good Night, Ringo singing that John Lennon pen song, Good Night. If you ever listen to this, it's an ambient record of John and Yoko doing recordings all night and then waking up in the morning and making love, these two virgins here. It was very controversial in so many ways, from the full-on nude cover, frontal and back, when it came out. I bought this record at a mall in Daly City, just south of San Francisco, and I had to ask for it. I said, "Do you have the new John Lennon record?" And the guy said, "Are you sure you want it?" And I bought it. It was behind the counter. He pulled it out. And when I listened to it, you're waiting for the song, and it doesn't happen. It's an ambient record. Then the Beatles had a very short-lived side label called Zapple Records. It was the avant-garde wing of Apple Records. Only 2 records were released. The first one was Unfinished Music, Volume 2. This was on Zapple. Also, there's another record, which I'll show you in a minute, that came out on Zapple. But again, another Ambient record. This cover picture is when right after Yoko had her miscarriage. And just, I mean, these records are not for everyone and not for the faint of heart. And I kind of almost didn't want to show these kind of records because I don't want to take away from the Lou Reed record where there's a mood to that record. And out of all of these, except for the last two, which I'll show too, aren't very listenable for the mere mortals. These are challenging records. The third in the series of unfinished music, in a way, is the Wedding album. And again, this is an experimental album that came out with this wonderfully produced box. Chimera Records has introduced and reissued these with wonderful packaging. What a beautiful cover that is. The bed in for peace here. There's a replica, a bagism, literally a replica of a slice of their wedding cake, photographed of their wedding cake. And there's all press releases in here and a booklet of articles about John and Yoko when they run away to Gibraltar to get married. Then there's Electronic Sounds by George Harrison, the other sole release on Zapple Records, the experimental wing of Apple. There was a third record planned. It was a poetry record of Richard Brodigan. Poetry, the writer of Trout Fishing in America. It was nixed, and Alan Klein shut the Zapple label down. It's run by Barry Miles, but it lasted no more because it wasn't really a financial success, obviously. And they really wanted to do some experimental things and some, in a way, before we called it industrial, but avant-garde wing of a Beatles label. And of course, when you have fans of the Beatles who expect pop music, you bring in electronic music, you bring in ambient, the music of Yoko Ono. That's not the audience for this stuff. So, the balls they had to bring this stuff to fruition and on their label was pretty dramatic when you think about it at the time. But this album came out in 1969. George Harrison was one of the early adopters or purchasers of the Moog synthesizer. He brought it over to England. Mickey Dolenz of the Monkees, I think, bought the first one and first used it on the Monkees album Headquarters. But George Harrison wanted a tutorial how to use the Moog synthesizer, so he brought over Bernie Krause. Bernie Krause was a half of Beaver and Krause, electronic experimental team that recorded several albums for Warner Brothers Records, which I have in my collection, that are really interesting records. And those two were actually West Coast sales reps for the Moog synthesizer. I believe they had their first sort of a booth at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967, trying to sell it to musicians and studios. And so he brings them over. They do this test recording, and unbeknownst to Bernie Krause, George Harrison puts one side on here. Wasn't very happy with it. Apparently on different pressings, Bernie's name is right there, and it was almost like silvered out there. So the controversy, Bernie thought that George Harrison stole this test demo thing to put on one side of this. It's an experimental record. It's exactly what you think it is, but it is really interesting of basically playing with the knobs, playing with what a Moog synthesizer can do in 1968-69. And lastly, in the Beatle camp here, I want to talk about Paul McCartney's experimental music. Now, he's done records of remixes and have other third parties do things. That's not what I'm talking about here. I want to talk about his project, The Fireman. 3 records, The Fireman, the third of which actually is a song-based record, and this is Electronic Arguments. I'm not going to talk about this one because those are actually songs, and from my point of view, that's one of the best solo McCartney albums of the last quarter century. Co-produced with Youth of Killing Joke. He collaborated with these 2 records. Now, these are the ones I'm talking about. These are electronic, somewhat ambient electronic music. There's occasional vocals, but they're not lyrically vocals, just the voice added to this electronic instruments. There's a rhythm, an ongoing drone-like to it, somewhat melodic at times, but not really. I love these 2 records, and I think only one of them came out on vinyl at some point. I would like a slipcase of the 3 Fireman albums on vinyl. I think it's due. This one is called Strawberries, Ocean, Ship, Forest, Again, it's an ambient electronic album under the name Fireman, which is appropriate. You don't put a Paul McCartney record like that in the bins under the name Paul McCartney. The other one is Fireman Rushes. The Fireman Rushes. Basically, if you can think of what that means, the fireman rushes in. That's the lyric of Penny Lane. That's where this one got its name, even with nudity included right there on the insert. But again, these are something very different for the artist, not expected by the artist. I love when an artist tries something different and experiments, and especially these pop artists here. So in the end, it was the Lou Reed album, Hudson River Wind Meditation, that inspired me to kind of do this little display of pop musicians, rock musicians, that really twist things around and try something really different. Now, Lou Reed didn't put this out as a Lou Reed record in vain. That's why it came out independently as a CD back in 2007. But I love that this series is breaking out from Light in the Attic, and they're doing this experimental thing. Again, starting with the Lou Reed archive series of the initial copyright tape that he recorded with John Cale. And now this, the end of his life, he was sick and he was working on body and health things. And this is really a beautiful, serene, it's music of feeling. It's not songs you put on, pop songs to get up and dance to. It's music to relax to. It's music to look within yourself to. I'm not a Tai Chi person. I'm not a meditative person, but I respect an artist who does something like this. And I love that Light in the Attic is doing this kind of series in collaboration with Laurie Anderson and putting these records out. And I really look forward to see what they're going to do with subsequent volumes. So thanks for watching the Yin Yang. Maybe they'll do this at some point and piss more people off, right? But this is an interesting record. I think it's due for a retrospective now as well, too. So thanks for watching. Mazzy loves you.